Hello, and welcome to the SculptingPro official documentation, the first release. In this documentation, you will learn the basic setup of the SculptingPro, and I will show you some tips and tricks of how to use the plugin in the most efficient way. Let's start with the very first use in the Unity editor. There are two ways of how to enable the SculptingPro in the Unity editor. The first one, go to the window, SculptingPro, and press Enable in Editor. The second one, create any game object with mesh filter, add a SculptingPro model component, and press Sculpt this object in Unity editor. The sculpting editor is divided into two modes, global sculpting and locked sculpting. Global sculpting doesn't focus on any specific mesh and the sculpting editor panel appears gray. On the other hand, the locked sculpting does focus on specific mesh and the editor panel appears orange. You can enable or disable locked sculpting by selecting or deselecting desired mesh. Let's briefly jump into sculpting tools in the Unity editor. The panel mesh features doesn't appear if the sculpting mode is set to global. So keep in mind that if you are sculpting a specific model, you've got more features available. The sculpting editor offers plenty of well-known sculpting brushes and features. You've got the brush radius and brush intensity that can be also changed with the shortcuts by holding left control for radius and left alt for intensity. You can also change the limits for each slider field if your mesh requires higher values. Next, we've got a field called Try Auto Close Seams, which is a very helpful feature. This helps you to connect broken vertices with possible neighbors. It's mostly used for spatial meshes and it evaluates much better results than clean mesh. The list of tools contains well-known brush types across all sculpting softwares. The first, we've got Raise and Lower. If you would like to lower the mesh, hold left control and left mouse button. Just a quick tip. Some tools contain its subsettings which help you to specify certain brushes. For example, the sculpting type indicates to how the processed vertices will move in what direction. The default value, Surface Normal, indicates to the brush's normal direction. There are other options that will help you in specific cases. Detailed description for each option can be found in the official documentation. The radius type indicates to how processed vertices will behave. The exponential option evaluates smoother and much authentic results. Next, we've got Revert, Grab, Noise, Stylize, and Smooth. Each brush type has its own special functionality and there are no more settings to talk about. Again, detailed description can be found in the official documentation. Additionally, mesh features. Mesh features allow you to manipulate with mesh in an advanced way. You can subdivide mesh, increase the vertex count, smooth mesh and flip mesh. All the features are available at runtime as well. Distance limits allow you to limit certain vertices between their initial position and working position. It's great if you would like to limit sculpting editor on specific radial scale. You can also save the mesh to the assets, as the asset. Please keep in mind that this will not export the mesh into OBJ or FBX. There is also an option to restore the mesh into its initial state. If you'd like to make a step back, there is an undo feature. You can change the maximum undo records in the preferences. Let's quickly jump into SculptingPro preferences. Go to the window, SculptingPro, and press Preferences. The available fields in the Preferences window indicate the default values that some SculptingPro components use at the time of their initialization. You can customize these fields by your own needs. Here you can also find the maximum history records. The higher the value is, the more memory it takes. Let's set up the real-time sculpting. You will need at least one main camera that will represent the real-time sculpting origin. So select the main camera and add a SculptingPro real-time component. The component has many fields that allow you to control basically the same attributes as for the Editor-sculpting, except the multi-threading, target camera and target sculpting brush. In real-time sculpting, you can disable or enable multi-threading. There are two very important and required fields that need to be assigned: the target camera field and target sculpting brush. Target camera indicates to the main camera which will process sculpting. It's basically this camera. And the target sculpting brush can be any object that will represent the sculpting brush. You can use the default example brush in the prefabs folder. Now we need some input. Let's add an input sample. Input sample is a simple input handler that helps you to send input messages to the real-time sculpting. You can even create additional key events for PC platform, which helps you to create much faster sculpting editor. For instance, I would like to change the brush type to lower if I press number 2, and if I press number 1, I would like to change the brush type to erase. Now let's set up the mobile. The setup for mobile is very same as for PC. The only thing you have to do is to change the target platform to mobile. The input will automatically change. The sculpting will work when finger touches the screen. Let's set up the real-time sculpting for VR. I'm going to use the built-in Unity XR plugin, which handles the VR platform very well. Install the XR plugin management. Create a simple VR player with VR hands and VR head. Select one of the controllers and add a SculptingPro real-time component. Switch the target platform to VR, assign this control to the required field, and assign the target brush from prefab folder. And for the VR input, import the proper XR input dependency and add a VR input. Here you can select your desired input button for sculpting. The setup process is the very same for all the other VM frameworks. You just need a proper third-party asset from the asset store. And that's it. Please don't forget that every sculptable object must contain SculptingPro model component, which holds mesh data. Let's make a very simple and practical sculpting editor with user interface. First of all, I am going to set up the real-time sculpting. I have described exact steps a few seconds earlier, so I will speed up the setup process. Now, let's create a UI. I would like to change the brush radius and brush intensity at runtime, so I'll create some UI sliders. If the sliders are ready, I would like to connect the sliders with the sculpting logic. So if I move the slider a little bit, I would like to send the slider values to the sculpting component. Let's add an event to the slider, which will refer to the SculptingPro real-time component. Select Change Radius and assign the slider to the required field. And do the same for brush intensity, but instead of Change Radius, choose Change Intensity method. Let's make a first test. Seems okay to me. Now, I would like to change the brush state between raise, lower, revert and so on. I will create a horizontal layout that will keep button elements. If all my buttons are ready, let's create events on click. Assign a SculptingPro real-time component to the required fields and choose a Change Brush State method. Each brush state has its own indexed or order number. If you select the brush state field on the real-time sculpting component, you can clearly say what order each element holds. Raise is the first, lower is the second, and so on. I'm going to assign a proper index value for each brush state button. Let's check it out. Seems fine to me. I can easily change the brush state. And I can even add much advanced features such as undo, smooth, flip, or restore. All the other advanced methods can be found in the official docs. SculptingPro contains a well-organized and public API that may help you for your personal and advanced stuff. If you would like to use the SculptingPro API, you need to implement the SculptingPro namespace. To customize the input for sculpting, you need an object with SculptingPro real-time component. I've made a very simple input handler that may help you to understand how to process the sculpting with your own events. As the code says, when I hold the space, the sculpting will process. When I release the space key, the sculpting will stop. These two methods are very essential for proper sculpting. If you would like to disable the sculpting, use Enable-Disable Sculpting method. It's a much safer way than enabling or disabling the entire script. Also, you can call advanced methods for the specific SculptingPro real-time component. It's the very same as for the UI events. That's all for the documentation, and I hope it helped you to understand the overall workflow. There are many example products that you can download for free to test your performance and to see the limitless possibilities of real-time sculpting in Unity Engine. If you have any questions, suggestions or issues, do not hesitate and join my official Discord channel for real-time support. Thank you for your time and goodbye!